Summer when it's warm. Remember those times? Yeah. It's a little hard for us right now to think about that. Thank you. Wow, that worked pretty well, didn't it? Yeah. So anyway, they are walking along, and it's kind of busy. There are people out gathered around those tables and doing that. And all of a sudden, the grandfather kind of listens closely, stops, and all of a sudden he goes like this to his grandson, and they go over by the doorway of the restaurant there, the cafe there, and there's a flower box, and behind those flowers of seasonal plants that are all there, he kind of separates that, and he sees a small little nest there. And in that nest are a number of chicks that are peeping away, and the joy just spread across and leapt across his grandson's face as he saw those little chicks and saw what was happening there, saw God's creation, was excited about all that was taking place there. And grandfather gently then kind of closed in the flowers again to make sure that they were protected. And as they looked around, there really wasn't anybody who was paying attention to them, and the conversations were still going on, and people were laughing loudly, and all the stuff that was going on, they were eating, nothing seemed to happen, and the grandson grabbed his grandfather's hand and says, "Grandfather, why could you hear those little birds?" And the grandfather looked around, and they were on some concrete at that point. He reached into his pocket and he pulled out a handful of change, and he let it drop there in the open, and suddenly the conversation stopped. The eating stopped. There was quiet in the area, and in fact some of those folks somehow thought that they were going to reach down and start to grab some of those coins when they saw the grandson scattering around, making sure that all those coins were picked up. And once they had been picked up, the grandfather spoke. He says, "Well, it's all in what you're listening for, my child. It's all in what you're listening for." These last few weeks, in the last few months, what have you been listening for here at Emmanuel? For several months now, we've been in the process of encouraging our people, encouraging you, to take a closer look at what God has done in our life, the generosity that He has shown through His Son, Jesus Christ, and how that and what that does in our life as we strive to be Christ-like, as we strive to be generous, not only financially, but generous in many other ways as leadership and as people who love Christ and are willing to take that message out into our community. Our leadership has worked hard at putting this mission, this vision in front of you as we are inspired to share the good news of Jesus, the love of Jesus, as we seek to do that through our school, as we seek to do that through our ministries here at the church, as we seek to do that in many different ways. We're inspired to grow. I don't know, maybe you know this. Do you know what the first command in the scriptures was back in Genesis? The first command was, you see all this? Eat freely of this garden. Eat freely of this garden. You know what the last command was? The last command was, come to me in Revelation. Come to me, all who are heavy. Eat and drink freely. You ever thought about this as a banquet table? You ever thought about how this is meant for us to continue to grow? And that's really what we're striving to do, is continue and be inspired to grow in our faith, to be nourished and blessed, to invite others to be part of our fellowship and part of our vision as we are also inspired to serve in our communities, outside of our walls as well as inside of our walls. So my question is, again, what were you listening for? If you're listening for a huge solution that everyone else is going to accomplish along the way in our mission and reaching our ministry and also our new worship center, you probably didn't hear what you needed to hear. If you were listening for how you might become involved and connected, maybe you heard some things, because that's what we're striving to do. We're striving to lay out these concrete things that we are hoping to do in our church, in our school, in our community. And we are seeking leaders to help us in that. Men, women, youth who can help lead us forward. And we're looking for it not only to stay on paper, but to truly become a reality. That's what we're striving to do. I have to tell you that there's a part of me that is a little tired of being inspired. They will say that along the way. Anytime you lead an event and you try to do this over a long period of time, by the time the last people hear about it and say, oh, what's inspired, the leaders and those who are leading are kind of tired of it. But you know what? I actually got to do it. This last week, I got to sit and talk about baptism with someone and to encourage them to bring their children to be baptized. I got to lead several Bible studies. I got to talk to somebody in need. I got to reach out to the community. I got to listen to several of our members who are doing that same thing. And it was incredibly exciting as we once again are inspired here at Emmanuel. I don't know if you're aware of it, but we are moving now into the season of Lent. Ash Wednesday begins this Wednesday. In fact, we have worship service at 4:30 and 6:30. I encourage you to come. Come to one of those. Come and be part of the fellowship in between. Make that part of your life as Pastor and I take a look at the Lord's Prayer as a basis for the Lenten season as we do that each Wednesday at 4:30 and 6:30. But this gospel reading before each Ash Wednesday each year is, we use these big words when we're not sure how to describe them. Say it with me. Today is Transfiguration Sunday. And on that Transfiguration Sunday, whether it's in Matthew or Luke or Mark, there is high expectations as the disciples have been listening to Jesus and they follow him up on that high mountain. Peter, James, and John are up there on that high mountainside and they are suddenly awestruck by this incredible sight of Jesus. Mark says he was bleached whiter than any bleach could happen here on this earth. Luke says the disciples were so tired from climbing the mountain that they fell asleep. Matthew says they were gathered up on the very high mountain, but they were in heaven, if you will. They saw that bit of glory. I know that they were in heaven, and you know why? Because they knew who Elijah and Moses were. They knew who they were. We know that when we get to heaven, we'll know those around us. And we can celebrate that. And so there's that bit of heaven happening. And the mountaintop experience, Jesus on the mountaintop, as they heard the Father say, "This is my Son." Listen to him. Listen to him. Not all the other things, but listen to him. Now we know that the disciples didn't do a very good job of that, quite honestly, because as they're coming down from the mountain, Jesus says, "Don't tell anybody about this vision until after I rise from the dead." Well, that's fine. Mark says all the time after that, the disciples kept asking themselves, what is this raising from the dead thing? What is he talking about? And even if you go all the way to John chapter 20, which is the resurrection in John, there's a sentence in there, it's either verse 7 or 8, that says, they still did not understand that Jesus had to raise from the dead. They were kind of slow. And you know what? Sometimes we are too. Sometimes we are kind of slow when it comes to catching on or understanding what is going on. Now, if we were to have a camera here and we were to ask the man or woman on the street exactly what inspired is, we would get a variety of different answers. And that's okay. Because we know that inspired is going to manifest itself in an incredible number of ways. Now, the disciples didn't necessarily want to go to Jerusalem and watch Jesus die. They wanted to stay there in heaven. They wanted to stay there with Jesus. But they didn't. What about Emmanuel? Let me ask this. Anybody know somebody named Aaron Rodgers? Anybody? Raise your hand if you know him. Oh, you've met him? You talked to him? No. Well, Aaron Rodgers is a quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, right? And as I share that and as I think about that, most of us here, me included, think that he's a pretty good player. In fact, he's an all-star player. He's a Hall of Famer, at least just not been voted in yet. He's a great leader in the team. And as he lives his life, what would you think if Aaron Rodgers each week gathered his team together, brought them to, what's that field over there? Lambeau Field. Gathered them, went out on the field, gathered his team around him in the huddle, and they just stayed in the huddle for 35 seconds. And then the referee blew his whistle and called a delay of game, and then it happened again and again. We wouldn't think much of Aaron Rodgers, would we? Or what about if he just brought them up to the line of scrimmage and then never hiked the ball? Or every time Randall Cobb ran a slant across the field, he threw the ball where Randall was instead of where he was going. What would you think of Aaron Rodgers at that point? You'd probably think he wasn't much of a leader or much of a quarterback along the way. You know what? Sometimes this last week and the week before, I think we're at that point at Emmanuel. Are we gathering as a team together here? Are we really going out of the huddle and going to the line of scrimmage and just staying there? Are we joyfully serving with Jesus in every way possible so this incredible news of Jesus Christ can get into our community? If we're stuck here, then we're not what the church was intended for Jesus Christ. Now, the leadership has brought to you a goal. And the goal is that we encourage our people to become involved as leaders in our church, in our ministries, to serve in many different ways, and to resource the vision that's in front of us, $2.4 million over the next 2 years. We believe that we can do this. We believe that God has plans for us to do that. In a moment, we're going to ask you to bring forward your commitment card and what that means in your life, and what that means for Emmanuel. They're in your pews there. They're either on the edge or in the middle. They've been around a while. I know that some of you have already filled them out. In fact, some of you have brought them forward already. What does that mean for you? Does it mean a change, or is it the same old, same old? Is it, I haven't changed, I'm just going to fill this out, it won't make a difference? Or do you hear, this is my son whom I love and I will listen to? Well, I'd like to tell you that all of this depends upon you. But I'm more realistic than that. You know what? I shouldn't have pointed out those commitment cards to you, because now I see everybody's head down. You're looking to put those commitment cards aside, please. if I said that this was up to you,